Hello, Scott Baker here for Truth and Liberty. Got a new video for you. This one's about Governor Abbott's property tax plan. The summary is the property taxes have become a hot topic in Texas in the last few years. Everybody knows this. A lot of people who pay taxes are all having to deal with it. The Republican Party has made attempts for the last few years to address the ever-increasing burden on Texas residents. Governor Abbott has announced his 5-point proposal to further reduce this burden on Texas families. I'm going to go through these and talk about a little bit about why I think some of them are really good ideas. So the problem, the legislature has raised the homestead exemptions for property tax multiple times. However, local appraisers have countered this by raising the values up to 10%, which is the cap right now. So the way that this works is if you have a $200,000 house and they put an exemption at $100,000, you'd think you'd cut your property tax in half. Well, then the local appraisal boards and appraisers have come along and said, oh, well, we'll raise the value or the appraisal of that home by, 25% or 30% or even 50% in some cases. And so your property tax bill goes up because they've raised the value up above what the appraisal exemption is, or what the property tax exemption is. So property tax bills keep going up despite these efforts. Another issue with this, local governments control a lot of the property tax rates and how the tax revenue is spent. There's no shortage of bureaucrats at every level of government willing to spend our tax dollars. School district property taxes make up the largest portion for most homeowners. So the school district, the property taxes, and it's split into two pieces. The M&O, which is the maintenance and operations, is a portion of your tax bill. The other part is the bond money that is raised to build facilities. So school district property taxes definitely make up a large portion of our tax bill. So Governor Abbott has proposed a plan. It's a 5-point plan. Number 1, cap local government spending growth. Number 2, require 2/3 voter approval for tax increases. Number 3, empower voters to force rollback elections. This is an interesting one. Number 4, limit and cap appraisal growth. I definitely like this one. And number 5, eliminate school property taxes on homesteads. Also a good idea. Look, the reality is there's a big effort to replace the property tax system with some other tax mechanism. There's a lot of challenges. I'll do another video on that later on. But there's a lot of challenges, and there's nothing really ready to just rip and replace the property tax system. There's a lot of existing debt that has to be taken care of, and there has to be a concrete plan that will replace those funds where necessary, decrease spending where necessary, which is always a good thing, and get us to a viable plan in the future, a path to the future that we can replace all of the property taxes, or at least all of the homestead property taxes, with some type of sales tax at some level, or perhaps a business tax at some level. But there's a lot of challenges to that. But let's keep going. So the first one, cap local spending. Governor Abbott says that he wants to limit local spending increases to the lesser of population growth plus inflation, or 3.5%. That means whichever one's lower. That means if population growth plus inflation is higher than 3.5%, then the spending increases would be capped at 3.5%. If they're lower, then it would be whatever that math is, the population growth plus inflation. Unfortunately, under Joe Biden, inflation was up at 11-12%. Right now, it's down low 2-3%. That's where we want to go, and the Fed has even said their target is 2%. But we can't always count on that inflation number, which is why we need to have an option to keep it at 3.5% instead. This is pretty reasonable. There are some challenges with it, and we'll talk about those later. But Texas already has state-level spending limits. So the state of Texas has spending limits similar to this, and this would standardize them for cities, counties, and other local entities. This is a pretty good idea. Capping spending is a good idea, and finding a reasonable way to do that is a very good idea and a very good way to go about it. This will force fiscal discipline, so tax hikes aren't easy defaults when the budgets grow, right? So when the local budget gets out of control, it's going to force the local government, whatever that entity is, a municipality, a school board, to look at ways to cut spending first because they won't be able to just raise taxes as high as they want. Require 2/3 approval. Any proposed local property tax increase would need approval from 2/3 of voter before it takes effect. Right now, the threshold is 50% plus one. There's been a lot of bonds, a lot of school bonds passed in the last couple of years. Just this year, there's billions of dollars worth of school bonds across the state passed. This would have raised the threshold for those to have passed to a 2/3 instead of 50% plus one, which is called a majority. This shifts power from local governing bodies to the people who actually pay the bills, theoretically. I think it probably does. This one may be a little bit harder to get through as far as a law. I think that there's some challenges there too, but it's not a terrible idea to require 2/3 approval. Most of the bonds that would have passed in the last few years, that have passed in the last few years, would not have passed with 2/3 of approval. So this would have eliminated a lot of those bonds. This would provide stronger protection than current majority vote thresholds for larger increases. Rollback elections. If 15% of registered voters in a local area sign a petition, they can trigger an election to roll back or lower the tax rate. This would give ordinary taxpayers a direct tool to reverse unwanted hikes and constrain local budgets. This is not a terrible idea. My concern would be that people keep, like a 15%, the same group of people keep doing a petition. So I would want to have some language to restrict it so that once it's petitioned, if it's voted again by the taxpayers to pass, then it passes, right? That we don't keep going back and forth with a minority, a small minority of 15% of registered voters in the county overriding the will of the 2/3 that have voted to pass this. So I think that you have to be careful with the way you do this language in general. But it is a nice tool to have something that you can force a rollback. It'll at least make our elected representatives think twice before initiating any kind of hikes. Limit and cap appraisal growth. Appraise all properties only once every 5 years instead of annually. Currently, appraisals happen annually in general. In the past, that hasn't always been consistent, but the appraisals right now are completely out of hand, so we need a way to pull this back, to rein in the appraisal authorities. Lower the appraisal, the homestead appraisal growth cap from 10% to 3% per year. So this would restrict the appraisal boards from being able to raise. They just instituted the 10% not too long ago, I believe, and I like the idea of rolling it even back to 3%. There are some challenges here. There's some free market things that I think that this kind of goes against, because ultimately the price should be set by the market. But as long as we have a property tax system in place, I think we have to do something like this. If we expand that 3% cap to all properties, not just homesteads, that should help renters and businesses by limiting cost pass-throughs. I think this sounds good. I mean, ultimately, if you rent a home from a property owner, and they have to pay property taxes on that, so when their taxes go up, they're going to raise your rent. So if we can provide a mechanism for them to cap those appraisals on rental properties as well, and businesses, especially small businesses, I think this is also an effective way to limit that. And of course, the goal is to stop rapid appraisal spikes that price people out of their homes. We don't want to see that happening. We have seen stories of this happening across the state for years, which is one of the reasons why property taxes have become such a hot button issue, is that we've even seen local taxing entities raise taxes to a point where they know that it would be painful enough to force people to have to sell their homes because they just couldn't afford to continue paying the property tax, even despite them paying off their own home. So I think that there's a lot of benefit to this. Ultimately, if we can get rid of property taxes altogether, then we can get back to no appraisal board and the market will set the price, which is the proper way for homes to be priced. Eliminate school property taxes on homesteads. I like this idea. I think the governor is really talking about mostly eliminating M&O, which is the maintenance operations portion of the taxes. I don't know that you're going to get away from the bond and facility portion of the taxes. There's so many of them out there now that it would make it very difficult for school districts to maintain the current model, which is not necessarily a terrible thing, but all of that debt has to be paid by somebody, and it really should be paid for by the voters in those districts. We want to keep this local. We don't want school districts just foisting that tax burden upon all of the taxpayers in the state of Texas. The goal is to get rid of taxes and eliminate taxes and reduce taxes, not to just shuffle those expenses to another fund as much as possible. The reality is it's very difficult to do that, and it's why we need a more long-term plan and strategy. But this plan that Governor Abbott has put forth, I think, is a good way to really lock in some of the benefits that we've gotten from the last few legislative sessions. Since school taxes are the largest share of most residential bills, eliminating at least a significant portion of them through the M&O would deliver the biggest permanent cut, as long as we can lock it in, which is why we need the legislature to pass this. This would actually require a constitutional amendment so voters can decide whether to abolish school district property taxes for homeowners. Businesses would still pay property taxes, and there's some other funds that they're talking about using. The estimated cost is around $11 billion a year, and Governor Abbott is arguing that state surplus and state funds can cover it without gutting schools. And why he says that is because it will be a significant impact if you just limit the taxes and the tax burden, but you don't replace it or offset that cost with something. It will require both legislative action and the statewide vote for a constitutional amendment in order to pass this, because it requires amending the state constitution. I think there's something to this. I do want to see language that would make sure that local control of the school boards is maintained, that we don't institutionalize a statewide spending system that we don't have control of as local property owners. So the summary is the property taxes continue to be an issue in Texas. I think just about everybody knows this, and it's one of the things that's driving up housing prices between the appraisals, the taxes, and everything else. There's some other factors as well, but that's outside this discussion. How we decrease and ultimately replace our property taxes remains a real challenge for Texas lawmakers. Governor Abbott's Keep Texas Affordable agenda offers a promising approach to structural reforms that can lock in the wins we've already got. Like I said, this isn't perfect. I have questions about some of it, and I think they have to be very careful about the language they use, but I think this is a really good plan. So what can you do to help? Well, the November elections are just a few months away. About 3 months, actually. They're coming very fast. We need to elect folks who will be fiscally responsible and rein in the out-of-control taxes at every level of government. It's as simple as that. Voting for tax and spend big government representatives will get you higher taxes and more spending, and will make housing and homes less affordable. Make sure your family, friends, and neighbors know how important this election is. Every vote counts. We need you to show up at the polls in November, and we need you to let your state representatives in the legislature know that this is an important issue and that you support it if you do. It really is as simple as that. I want to say thank you. Please like and subscribe. If you appreciate my videos, I appreciate you subscribing and helping push these up in the numbers so that more people can see them. Post your comments. I always want to hear what you have to say. And finally, God bless you. God bless the state of Texas, and God bless the United States of America. I'm Scott Baker for Truth and Liberty.